Okay, so our next speaker, I'm going to pronounce his name right because I didn't the first time. Dr. Ballerstedt is our next speaker. He earned his bachelor's degree and master's degree at the University of Georgia and his doctorate at the University of Kentucky. He has an extensive background in forage production, utilization, and forage-based livestock production systems, and was the forage extension specialist at Oregon State University from 1986 until 1992. Peter's personal experience has led him to re-examine human diet and health. What he has learned doesn't agree with the advice given for the past several decades. This new understanding, combined with his forage background, has given him an increased passion for the key to true social, economic, and ecological sustainability. Ruminant animal production systems, the source of butter, red meat, and cheese.
Cheese. Good morning. All right, we can get better as we go along. So I hope to achieve several things here today. One is that I hope that by the time I'm done, you'll understand why I describe this as fermented plant product. And by the end of today, I think you'll understand why looking at a picture like this does not evoke the same metabolic effect of looking at a plate of hot, fresh chocolate chip cookies. I'm sorry for the insulin spike that just occurred in all of you, but some of these things are unavoidable. So I also hope that I can exercise the demon of guilt. So I want to talk to people who are restoring their mental and physical and emotional health, following diets that contain varying degrees of animal source foods. Please don't listen to the voices that sold you the diet that made you sick in the first place. And they are related, the two narratives. And now we're being fed ever more reasons about why you should feel guilty about increasing the odds of you getting to die with all the toes you were born with, because you're eating a diet wholly or largely based on red meat. So I want to try to eliminate that as an impediment to adopting a more informed dietary lifestyle. So now let's just consider something. Tipping my hat to some of the books that influenced me greatly, Gary Taubes and his article that first appeared in New York Times Magazine that led to Good Calories, Bad Calories. That was the first book after Protein Power that I read. And now let's just speculate wildly, because I want to set the stage here for us to reconsider a lot of the knowledge we've received. What if sustainable agriculture actually requires ruminants? What if a healthy diet includes butter, red meat, and cheese? How might these sorts of things affect the common conversation about sustainability? I just saw a news headline that said de Blasio, mayor of New York City, is prepared to ban hot dogs for reasons of climate change. What if ruminant agriculture actually promotes ecological health? What if chronic disease is reduced by eating animal products? What if the implied virtues of various label claims aren't justified? What if unwarranted food fears produce actual physical harm? What if the same folks who sold us on the low-fat is heart-healthy male bovine fecal matter have been selling us all these other myths too? I know I'm speculating wildly here. Not really. All these are justifiable. We've been enjoying the comfort of opinion, maybe enjoying isn't the right word, the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. The full quote from President Kennedy. The great enemy of truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Too often we hold fast To the cliches of our forebears, we subject all facts to a prefabricated set of interpretations. We enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. I am so glad that this does not pertain to human nutrition. Now, when you spend very much time in this sustainability, diet, food production space, you begin to hear the same sort of arguments come and be presented as news stories again and again. And when you read them, they seem like they have good arguments. They seem like really strong ropes. But I hope today that I can begin unraveling those ropes, because we have to do that in order to test each strand. And when we test each strand objectively, they fail. And so I share my sources. I'm happy to engage in the conversation, but I hope I can serve up some food for thought. You should pardon the expression today. Now, sustainability itself needs to be deconstructed. Too often it's what I call sustainababble. It's like green. It's like all of these label claims that take a product, don't affect any meaningful change in it, but make it somehow appear better and more acceptable. Okay? One definition that I started using when I came back into this space in about 2010 was this one: sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That sounds good. And then my problem is I go thinking about it. So let's take a quick look at some of these ideas. How good are we at predicting the future? How good are we at predicting and looking towards solutions to present crises? Do we have any good history at that? Well, here's one that I like: the Great Horse Manure Crisis of 1894. In 50 years, every street in London will be buried under 9 feet of manure. We're talking literal manure, Ivor, not, sorry, just. And they had a big meeting. All of these people came together. They were going to try to figure out how to solve this problem. Because cities at that time were truly nasty places, because horses were the means of power and locomotion. It really was a problem. It was so big a problem that instead of seeing this program all the way through to its end as planned, they all declared defeat and left after 3 days, saying it was hopeless. They couldn't see any solution, because these people couldn't imagine the internal combustion engine, which solved that problem. If you're familiar with the story of aluminum, at one point aluminum was more valuable on a weight basis than gold. And we've seen what's happened to constant dollar value of aluminum over time. And there's many others. It's fun that we had Earth Day at the beginning. Go look up the very confident pronouncements of doom and disaster that were made in 1970 for the first Earth Day, and see how they've done. And we're still listening to those people. It's remarkable. Maybe I'm a little jealous. So the other problem, so we don't have a good idea, we don't have good track record at predicting the future or imagining technology that we're not familiar with or hasn't even been invented yet. Okay, we're also confronting here an idea that sustainability implies stasis. It implies maintenance. And frankly, I really don't want to maintain where we are. Anybody? Okay, if you think this is good, check this out. Over half of adult Americans today have diabetes or prediabetes. 60% of adult Americans have one or more chronic conditions. Only 12% of adult Americans enjoy optimal metabolic health. You think, I really don't want to see that maintained. I don't see how we can. The cost is bankrupting us, equivalent to 9.3% of GDP. All of farm gate value, by the way, is 1%. Okay? So, and I want you to know that this kind of perspective has not yet come into the conversation about sustainability. If they consider health in conversations about sustainability, it is wholly informed by our received wisdom of what constitutes a healthy diet. Okay? Do we have any reason to doubt that? Thank you. So this is why it's necessary for us to kind of get a bigger picture of this idea. So I go looking, I'm going to come visit an area, I want to see what's going on. So you're doing pretty well here in the beehive state. You rank towards the bottom in terms of percentage of your population that's obese or overweight. But before we start packing ourselves on the back too much, we should look at what it was in 1990, what it was in 2000. And you're above the national average of what it was back in 1970s. So something is going wrong. The first time I saw this image, it struck me. This is from the late 19th century, I believe, when the painting was made. And if you can just let your mind run through that scene. And if you have a romantic image of what agriculture used to look like, I beg you to look deeply at this image. One of our goals ought to be, we should all strive against the generation and propagation of unnecessary human suffering and pain. Call me radical, but thank you. Call me radical, but I'm for Team Human. I think what we ought to strive for is increasing human flourishing worldwide. Because when we do that, we will minimize human impact. You can't get to the one via the other. It has to go the other way. One size fits all, broken, we should know that. And death is inevitable. Notice I said unnecessary suffering. Life in a clay suit involves suffering. It's going to happen. Either you're going to inflict it on the loved ones you leave behind, or they're going to leave before you do, for example. Death is inevitable, but a life of protracted ill health is not. Can I get an amen? Amen. Thank you. Chronic disease prevention and control helps people to live longer and healthier lives. There he goes, being radical again. And here I go again. The preponderance of evidence from all scientific disciplines, not just that branch that's known as nutritional epidemiology of chronic disease. Sorry, but I digest. The preponderance of evidence from all scientific disciplines strongly suggests that the most likely harm associated with meat consumption is from not consuming enough. Now, if you are, for reasons that are sound and personal to you, interested in following a vegetarian diet that meets your essential nutrient needs, please understand that I apologize if I'm offensive. I don't mean to be offensive. It's just a gift. But the vast majority of human beings in the world would prefer not to be vegetarians if they had the choice. I think the figure is something like 95% of the world's vegetarians would like to not be. I guess that's the way I first heard it. They are economically vegetarian, not philosophically vegetarian. So I want to just review some basic things. Let's start when it comes to red meat consumption especially and human health, a few facts. It won't make you fat, it doesn't clog your arteries, doesn't give you diabetes, doesn't cause cancer, doesn't kill your kidneys, doesn't acidify your blood, nor does it melt your bones. Nor will it make you morally weak. Thank you, J.R. Kellogg. Nor, and this is the bit that they brought me here to talk to you about, deprive you of food or drive climate change. And I know that I've just laid down some markers that contradict many of the comments, so let's get into some of that. I am here to say that ruminant animal agriculture is truly sustainable agriculture. It is the most sustainable form of agriculture that we have available to us. From grazing to grave, from pasture to plot, as in funeral. But we don't have that conversation. We've got some different conversation, so I want to go into some of that now. But the winning formula is that ruminant agriculture plus metabolic health equals sustainable societies. So what's a ruminant? A ruminant is one of a group of animals that have multi-compartmented stomachs, 4. They have cloven hooves, some have horns, some have antlers. They all eat high fiber, low fat, low protein quality diets of various kinds. They will bring that ingesta back up for subsequent rechewing and then swallow and rechew and then swallow. That's chewing a cud, the rumination process. They host a multitude of bacteria, protozoa, fungi within their rumen. Those are the organisms that do the heavy lifting. As a result, these animals are the key chain in energy flow throughout all the biosystems of the earth. Many, many different kinds, not just cattle, so I don't mean to apply I'm bovicentric. There are many different forms. They're all very tasty. And actually, it's interesting, their flesh differs far less than, if you will, the flesh of plants. That's interesting. They do differ in terms of what vegetation they eat. Some are browsers. They will nibble on the very tips of bushes and trees and things, and then others, like cattle, will eat the coarser material, the grasses. And so you have animals that live more on the interface between forest and grass, and then you have others that are more out in the grassland. So animal versus, see, we have to eat something. And we can't go stand outside and hold up our hands to the sun and get a sweet taste in our mouth. So apparently photosynthesis is out. There are people who say that they can just harvest the energy of the cosmos by their breathing. Although it does require an occasional reset at Burger King, I've been told. But seriously, so we're going to either consume animals or plants, and those tissues are fundamentally different. We could talk about that, but let's just look at energy. If I could give you the same number of calories from an animal source food and a plant source food, they would not have the same metabolic effect. I hope that's not new information. Have I lost you already? Okay. Eating sugar and starch does not provoke the same metabolic response as eating fat. Yes? Yes. Excellent. Protein and minerals. If I could provide the same quantity, same weight, same amount of iron, for example, from spinach and from beef liver, would that have the same metabolic effect? No. How about protein? No. And I urge you to watch Amber's presentation from Carnivore Conference and get an idea about vitamin requirements and how those are confounded, but the requirement is in fact dependent on the dietary source. Why is that advancing without my approval? So I make the suggestion that plant-sourced foods are not necessarily required. They may be something that you prefer, maybe they're good for flavor, but we have a whole lot of our conventional wisdom in human nutrition that says there are these phytonutrients. And as Georgia Ede says, plantioxidants, and all of these other things that somehow we have to get from our fruits and vegetables. What's the basis for all that? That's an interesting story to deconstruct, but we better get that done before we're going to have a meaningful conversation about sustainability. And the truth is that humanity's diet is already plant-based. The vast majority of our calories are coming from plant-sourced foods. We've just established that may not be a good thing in the United States. Something like 60% of our calories are coming from sugar, starch, and industrial oils. I'm trying to train myself to stop using vegetable oils. That's a marketing term. There's no vegetable involved. So it's an industrial oil. Okay? And if we look at protein, it's a similar thing worldwide. Yes, in the Western countries, we get slightly more of our protein from animal-sourced foods than we do from plant-sourced foods, but there are some that suggest that's nowhere near enough. And again, we're just looking at proportions. We haven't begun to look at amount yet. And okay, so let's shift a little bit. Let's look at the atmosphere that we operate within. This is what it looks like. We've got the vast majority of it being inert N2 gas that we cannot access directly. Neither can plants. We then have oxygen, which was the byproduct of the evolution of a new form of life that could take photosynthesis, that could take CO2 from the atmosphere and reduce it, but a byproduct that was poisonous to many life forms called oxygen was formed. Then we have water. By the time you get done with that, you're at 99+% of the Earth's atmosphere. Let's kind of color code some of these to look at the ones that are most likely to come up. So nitrogen, oxygen, water, carbon dioxide, methane. Talk about those last two. As I said, photosynthesis is the reduction of CO2 into carbohydrate. Okay, and then the heterotrophs, us, take that, and then it's a process of controlled oxidation to get that back to CO2. That's how we get energy in this system. The difference between fiber, which we can't digest, and sugar or starch that we can, is that the same glucose units are linked together differently between those two substances. And in cellulose, that bond requires a cellulase enzyme that no vertebrate animal produces. We are entirely dependent on the microorganisms that do produce it in order for the energy to be released from the most abundant carbohydrate in the biosphere. Now, I learned things, and apparently other people know these, but they're not popularly known. When you look at a food table for humans, I've been told that the caloric content, when we say 4 calories per gram for carbohydrate and for protein and 9 grams for fat or whatever it is, right? You've heard, okay? We're talking gross energy calories. Here's an example. I've got alfalfa hay over here. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. So I've got alfalfa hay over here, I've got wheat straw over here, and notice the very similar energy content here. That number look familiar? Yes? Wow, okay. So, we in animal agriculture are apparently more interested in how much energy can actually be used out of a feedstuff. Yeah, go figure. So the alfalfa hay, 2.1 versus the wheat straw of 1. This is how we do that. We say we got gross energy from that. Some gets digested, some is lost in feces or is gaseous losses. That would be methane. is an energy loss from the system. The digestible energy, some of that then is available for metabolism, others gets lost in urine. From that we can then get to net energy and a heat increment because different feeds produce a different heat response in the animal. And then we get down to how much of that energy is available for maintenance of the animal, how much is available to put gain on the animal, or how much is available to produce milk from the animal. I want you to know that consulting veterinarians and consulting nutritionists in the animal science realm get fired every single day. And not one of them dares blame the cow. Nitrogen cycling, perhaps you've heard of nitrogen fixation. This can occur as the result of lightning, or it can occur as the result of another biological process called biological nitrogen fixation. Human beings can do it by expending a great deal of fossil fuel energy. Basically, we're taking that N2 gas with a triple bond, and we're reducing that to make it a form that can be used as a fertilizer, and then there's cycles through the system. But it's important. And one of the best sources for that are all of the leguminous plants, many of which are forages that form a symbiotic relationship in their roots between bacteria and the plant. The bacteria does that biological nitrogen fixation. The plant then utilizes that. The animal then ingests the plant. We ingest the animal. Oh, by the way, that digestive process in the rumen, that's entirely without oxygen. It's a fermentation process. So that's why I call it a fermented plant product. Now, if we look at the global protein supply, I want you to realize that less protein is in the global food supply for humanity from animal source foods than from cereal grains. Yeah, you're beginning to see how that might not be a good idea. 38% roughly comes from animals, 41% from cereals, and the ruminants are contributing something like 15% once we look at dairy, beef and buffalo, sheep and goat. So when people talk about replacing that or doing away with that, ask them how they're going to replace that before you ever get to the human nutrition consequences of trying to adequately nourish a human being on a plant protein-based diet. And please, 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 we need to get our minds right about protein nutrition for monogastrics. Sorry, swine industry has already done that. For humans. Protein intake guidelines should not be on a percent of calories basis. If you'd like to know why, ask the question, but it's just not appropriate. Just simple version. Your calories in your diet, are they constant? No, okay. So if you have a percent of calories, what does that mean to the amount of protein your target is? It's not constant either. We do have a target for protein need. So that would be a problem. The intake target, as I say, should be a specific amount of high-quality protein based on individual considerations. Children, young people, that would be probably prior to 18, I should probably quantify that, are going to need more protein, a higher target, than people who are young adults. And we know that as we age, we require more protein than young adults do. So a one-size-fits-all protein target is meaningless, once again. Crude protein is the value that's listed in virtually every food label and on your food tables. Crude protein is a value derived by determining the percent nitrogen in a foodstuff, multiplying that value by 6.25 to calculate crude protein. Because we assume that all the nitrogen that was in there is in protein, and all that protein is 16% nitrogen. That works really well with ruminants, not so good with monogastrics. Biological value of protein in foods from animals is about 1.4 times that of foods from plants. That's across the board. There are variations. So if somebody's going to try to meet their protein needs from plants, they need to be shooting for an even higher target than would be implied by a lot of tables. Okay. Crude protein is not the same thing as amino acids, as I've just described. If we would look at any one particular example, in this case cooked navy beans, what we'd find is that in the case of the beans, despite having a very similar crude protein value to an identical quantity of cooked beef muscle, okay, less than 60% of that crude protein is actually coming from amino acids. In other words, it's not protein. The rest is non-protein nitrogen. Again, ruminants can utilize non-protein nitrogen, we can't. And now if we start looking worldwide, and again trying to increase flourishing worldwide, the poorest 20% of the tropical population around the world, rice provides more protein per person than beans, meat, or milk. So let's look at rice, crude protein is 9%, the beef is 28%, 0.3% lysine in the rice versus 2%. So if you were just going to go on a massive lysine basis, to get the amount of lysine, you need to eat about 7 times as much cooked rice as you would need to eat of beef. So factor that into our conversations about food production and supply. And in addition, there's a concept called DIAAS, D-I-A-A-S. I encourage you to look it up. Basically, it's factoring in on an essential amino acid basis the individual digestibilities of those essential amino acids. Because in plants, the very same amino acid can be less digestible. Oh, this is sounding more complicated. Cattle thus contribute directly to global food security. Because cattle rely on grazing and forages, over 90%, well, about 90% of the lifetime feed that goes into producing the typical grain-finished steer in the United States is not human edible. Only 10% is potentially human edible. So they rely on grazing and forages. They need only 0.6 of a kilogram of protein from human edible feed to produce 1 kilogram of protein in milk and meat, which is of higher nutritional quality than the plant proteins. They not only increase the quantity, they improve the quality. They upcycle resources. Considering both quantity and quality, the value of the proteins in the animal products for human consumption, in this case meat, milk and beef, cheeseburger, okay, is 2.5 times higher than that of the proteins in the potentially human edible plant protein inputs. Understand? I can feed corn and soybeans, which are potentially human edible, that sounds like a good deal to me. And we have to face the fact that we live on a finite earth where the vast majority of the earth's surface is not suitable for cultivation. You know, to produce those healthy fruits and vegetables and legumes and grains. Only 4% of the Earth's entire surface is suitable for cultivation, while almost a quarter of the Earth's surface is suitable for some form of ruminant animal agriculture. We've got lots of room to improve. Absolutely. And that's part of what I get to do in my day job. So here we are looking at this lovely state that we're getting to visit. Only 20% of your land area is farmland. 80%, doing the math quickly, is non-farmland. Harvested cropland is 2% of the total. Meanwhile, your permanent pasture and rangeland is 16%. That permanent pasture and rangeland, and we haven't even touched the public lands issue yet. This is privately owned stuff. The only food producing enterprise that we can have on that land is ruminant animal agriculture. So when people say, if we stopped animal agriculture, look at all the food we could produce, please understand what they've just done, intentionally or unintentionally, is confuse cropland, or arable land, even worse, with agricultural land. Arable land is the land you can till. Obviously, it's agricultural land. Not all agricultural land is suitable for cultivation. I guess I could have said that quicker. If we look worldwide and we look at the land surface, 63% of the land area of the world is not agricultural. Yet over a quarter is pasture and rangeland. And then you can see that portion of the remainder that's ideally suited for the production of the crops that are identified. And the further away we go from it being classed as ideally suited, the greater the inputs, the greater the potential for erosion, soil degradation, bigger costs, lower yield. And the reality is virtually all of the world's arable land is already in production. It's not like we've got a big potential bank to draw on. We can improve what we do on those lands, absolutely. And there's agronomists all around the world doing that. A lot of our food challenges going forward have to do with reducing food waste, which, by the way, is highest in the fresh fruits and vegetables, and it's also got to do with distribution and getting stable societies and things like that. Not so much with the agronomy 101 or the crop science 101. If we take that land that's arable and we look at what's being produced on it, 2/3 of that already is going to feed for food and fiber for human consumption. Actually, 3/4. Less than a quarter of the feed that's being produced on that land that's arable is going for feed production. So we've established that you would have to produce more of those plant foods if you got rid of animals. And we've only got a quarter of the land to do it on. Begin to see the problem? Maybe it's just me. If we look at specific grain crops, barley, corn, rice, sorghum, soybean meal, soy oil, wheat, just to name a few. This is the difference between feed and food. Food is for humans, feed is for animals. It's not quite the picture that people paint it. If we look individually, we do see vast differences. So corn is a feedstuff. Yes, most of it goes to feed livestock. Rice is a foodstuff. Virtually none of it goes to feed livestock. A little bit of wheat goes into producing as a feed. Soy meal is, soy oil, where soy oil is entirely for, well, that's what it gets used for. Worldwide, livestock agriculture consumes about 6 billion metric tons of dry matter, and something like 86% of that is, doing that right, so 86% of that 6 billion tons is not edible by humans. So again, when people say, if we stop feeding animals, maybe not. Again, we can only do certain things to produce food from land. We can grow forage crops, that would be hay or silage. We can grow pasture or native range. Those obviously have to be grazed by ruminants. Okay? Or we can grow grain, oilseed, fruit, and vegetable crops. And if we do that, and feed those products to humans, we should remember that there's a substantial amount of stalks and leaves and processing waste that's also generated by that production. And we can feed that to livestock. So it's not an either or. Livestock agriculture is firmly integrated into agriculture systems worldwide. They look very different depending on where you go, but you can't separate them. Let me rephrase that. You can't envision a plant-only ag system. Okay, so feed humans non-protein nitrogen. I mentioned because of the microorganisms in the rumen, they can capture non-protein sources of nitrogen. They build their own microbial protein that the animal then harvests. There's no essential amino acid in a ruminant's diet. There's no essential fatty acid in a ruminant's diet. There are two kinds of essential carbohydrates in a ruminant's diet. Kind of the inverse of human beings, which is an interesting mesh, almost like we evolved together. Perhaps not. And the waste issue, if you're a devotee of organic food production, where's the manure going to come from to grow your crops if you're going to eliminate animal agriculture? There's a difference between perennial crops and annual crops. Grasslands are perennial. They produce more roots. They maintain soil health to a better degree than annual crops. Our losses of soil through to erosion are unsustainable. It's a major crisis. We need to fix that. And grassland agriculture is the best source to reduce erosion. I love a good fart joke as much as the next man, but it's not farts, it's belches, so let's get that straight, please. And if you hear people say that, cattle produce more greenhouse gases than all transportation, here's the numbers. All of agriculture in the United States produces 9.0% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Of that, animal agriculture is 4%, which by my math means plant agriculture is producing 5%. Beef produces 2%. Healthcare industry produces 10. What would happen if we got rid of animal agriculture? And by the way, this also includes all pets. And many people who are involved in this advocacy don't mention that bit. But that's their intention. So if all that was eliminated from the United States, there's the potential benefit. We could reduce anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions by 2.6% in the United States, or 0.36% worldwide. But everything has a cost and benefit and cost, right? We need to weigh these things. So what are the potential costs? Oh, unbalanced food ecosystem and the creation of essential dietary nutrient deficiencies. And again, where would we get the fertilizer? If we just do a mind experiment with the numbers, right now in the United States, average consumption of beef per capita in the United States is somewhere around 2.5 ounces per person per day. So I double it. I'll take it to 5. If you were to eat the equivalent of 5 ounces of raw, boneless, trimmed beef on a life cycle basis, the greenhouse gas emissions would be less than the tailpipe emissions for driving 2,700 miles in a car getting 25 miles per gallon, or flying 5,200 commercial airline miles, which is about the round trip through Denver from JFK to LAX. That's what we're talking about. Because see, we're not talking about it. We're talking about something else, and we're using this as an argument. Get it? You understand? Okay. The environmental footprint associated to the production of animal versus, I like that, vegetal protein-containing food products needs to be reevaluated on the basis of the content of essential amino acids in foods. The production of protein-containing animal foods would retain a much lower environmental impact than that previously estimated, approximately lying within the range of that for most foods of plant source. I love this. These considerations might be useful in the political planning of the food production system. Might? Okay. Sorry, I'm running over. We can look at water use. If you see thousands of gallons per pound of beef, it's more male bovine fecal matter. And please make sure that when you're talking to somebody, you're talking about national numbers, not global numbers. Our livestock industry looks very different in the United States than it does elsewhere. U.S. average is 440 gallons of water per pound of raw, lean, trimmed beef. It would be less if we included the fat, which we ought to, but that's just how they do things. It would be less if we allowed for runoff because not all the water gets into the soil. If you go to areas that don't actually have to irrigate to produce crops and pasture, it's 25 gallons per pound of beef. Salt Lake City Airport average precipitation 16.5 inches. There are numbers, it's the equivalent of 2.8 pounds of raw beef per acre per day. Just to put the numbers in perspective for you. Standard parking space, that would be like 3.8 pounds of raw beef per parking space per year based on your average precipitation. Soil health, I've mentioned. You till soil, you break down soil structure, you can hold less water, you get less infiltration, you get more erosion, you get less fertility overall. The production of beef produces social benefits that are not compensated to the producer. And they're starting to look at these, and I'm trying to get them to look at an informed consideration of human health into this. But even without the health aspects, the social benefit to beef is estimated now, just from environmental services, at 37 cents a pound of beef. You think that'll go up or down when we factor in chronic disease? This comes up repeatedly. I'd like to leave it, but I just want to point out what the actual amounts of omegas, good, filter 3.0 works. The actual contents of omega-6 and omega-3 in beef versus other animal sources versus plant sources. We've gotten really wrapped around the axle about things that I don't think mean that much, especially in the context of an entire diet. And again, there'll be time, maybe if I shut up, time for questions and answers later today. So here's the review. Humans are heterotrophs. We have to consume other organisms. Animal products are superior sources of nutrition in the human diet. Ruminant animal products offer ruminant animal agriculture offers unique ecological advantages over other forms of food production. There can be no sustainable agriculture without ruminants. Ruminants are not competing with humans for resources, quite the contrary. Ruminants increase the quantity and quality of humanity's food supply. So superior protein, superior fats, minerals are more bioavailable, essential nutrients that are not available from plant sources. Modern humans exist because of ruminants. Modern societies depend upon them, and they will be essential to meeting the future needs of humanity. No one has proposed a viable alternative, despite their confident assertions. Sorry, one more. Estimates of ruminant animal agriculture's environmental impacts are typically overstated, oversimplified, and misleading. So I'm trying to recruit people into what I call the Ruminati, which is just a group of people who understand some of this and can learn how to communicate this into their spaces. So please contact me. But again, this has repercussions beyond the affluent West, and I encourage us to think about these. You can find me on social media. Look for grass-based health. Please note the words, it's grass-based, because all ruminant agriculture is grass-based, right? Got it? Good, okay. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, you can find me on YouTube, or please email me at peter.ballerstedt@gmail.com. Thank you, and thanks for coming.
Are you going to make that available in the presentation?
Sorry?
Where can you find their presentation?
The one I mentioned, this one? So I don't know how.
I'll post them.
Okay, they'll be posted. I typically post PDFs of my slide sets after I get done. And again, you can find other presentations I've given on YouTube.
You're famous.
Infamous.
One more time for Dr. Ballerstedt.